Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Academy, announcing the 24th of our Italian Wine Ambassador courses to be held in London, Austria, and Hong Kong from the 27th to the 29th of July. Are you up for the challenge of this demanding course? Do you want to be the next Italian Wine Ambassador? Learn more and apply now at vinitalyinternational.com. Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Cynthia Chaplin, and this is Voices. Every Wednesday, I will be sharing conversations with international wine industry professionals, discussing issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion through their personal experiences working in the field of wine. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you get your pods. Hello, and welcome to Voices. This is Cynthia Chaplin, and I'm very happy to have Lisa Granik with me on Voices today. Lisa is a master of wine, and she lives in New York, and she has had an incredibly impressive academic career as both a student and a professor at top universities in the USA, as well as Moscow State University, the Institute of State and Law in Tbilisi, Georgia, and several others. Happily for the wine world, though, she decided that, quote, a life of vodka, potatoes, and litigation was not going to do it for her, and she pivoted to follow her passion for wine. She became a master of wine in 2006, and she opened her business Tastingworks in 2010, where she works in strategic management consultancy for wineries who are keen to establish or improve their penetration in the U.S. market. She is widely recognized as the leading authority on Georgian wines, and she's published many books, articles, received numerous awards, too many to mention. But one of the things I really want to talk to Lisa about today is she is currently the co-chair of the Governance Committee and the Diversity, Inclusion, and Transformation Committee for the Council of Institute of Master of Wine. So, hey, Lisa, thank you for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Huge pleasure. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that you are the most passionate scholar. You've earned several degrees in totally lightweight subjects like law and foreign service. So, what turned the tide from that career to wine and studying for a Master of Wine, which is no small undertaking, as we all know?
It's a long story. I'll try to make it super short, but effectively, I had finished my doctoral dissertation and was turning it into a book manuscript when I ran into some friends I'd had from my career teaching, and not one of them appeared to be happy. And we had 3 people in a row, and they actually were often quite angry. And it was a wake-up call, and I thought, those were my only 3 friends in the profession, and I thought if they're not happy, maybe I should reevaluate what I'm thinking about doing. And so, I was lucky at the time I was on a fellowship and was able to step back. I was still turning the chapter of my dissertation into a book and thought if I were to start all over again, what might it be? And because I have that degree in foreign service and saw myself in very much the vein of a citizen of the world, part of being a graduate of Georgetown School of Foreign Service, I tried to think about what career I could pivot to that would encompass many of my other interests and a career that had something that I was already interested in. And, I thought about a number of things, but when wine suddenly appeared in my head one day on the subway, I thought, let me think about this one a little further. And I decided to give it a go. I kept my feet in academia for a while. I was still doing some writing and some part-time teaching for about a year. But then because I'm somebody who, I hadn't officially worked in wine shops and didn't feel comfortable simply asserting myself as a self-appointed expert, I decided to pursue the MW to give myself a firmer background in wine and as well as the critical ability to ask growers and winemakers harder questions rather than just be the recipient of their PR.
Yeah, that's such an important point. I mean, it's not only a credential that is, universally respected, so it gives you street cred right away, but it does give you a springboard to really dig deeper than oftentimes producers want to go. So that was a good one.
No question. I mean, by and large, a lot of wine journalists effectively are just third-party endorsers. They're free PR for wineries, and they just regurgitate whatever the wineries tell them and don't have the ability to cut through some of the things that they're told. And the MW, I mean, certainly there's still a wall sometimes because nobody knows everything about wine, and different producers have different opinions, and those opinions and experiences can be totally valid based on their terroirs. But nevertheless, I have a better ability to critically analyze what's in front of me.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of wine influencers at the moment, which is, I really have a love-hate relationship with that, but tending more towards hate at the moment. But
I'm not, no kidding. Anyway.
Yeah, but you're so right. I mean, it's a very interesting perspective, having that ability to be taken seriously and knowing your stuff, which really matters, and being able to sort of
people right. It's true. I mean, people think there's this wonderful curve that shows that people think they know so much about wine just because they've memorized a bunch of labels, or they've been tasting a lot of wines for a year or two, or they take one wine class and they think they know everything. And then the more and more you study, the more you realize it's like all of a sudden this graph, like, it goes up. Oh, I think I know so much about wine. And then the more you study, it tanks. And so that even by the time you become an MW, you're like, okay, I know something about wine. But I feel like there's much more that I don't know than what I know.
Yeah, I'm in the tank at the moment. Yeah, it is one of my favorite things about being in this industry is that, as you said, no one can know everything about wine. So there's an endless, license to study and explore, which is wonderful.
Especially because things keep changing too.
Absolutely. Well, let me talk to you about Tastingworks for a minute. What are the barriers to wineries wanting to enter the U.S. market? How do you strategize with producers, and where are most of your clients coming from trying to get into the U.S.?
Most of the people I've worked with are family wineries that are based in somewhere in Europe. It could be France, it could be Italy, and certainly Central Eastern Europe. Especially now. There are plenty of barriers. One is simply the fact that everybody wants to be in the States, and wine is not sold equally in all of the 50 states. There are plenty of areas of the country where no wine is sold, and people don't understand that. They just look at consumption as increasing without understanding some of the details. And then and concomitant with that is the issue that people, foreigners look at the United States as one market when in fact it's 50 markets, and they don't really understand that, arriving and finding an importer in one state does not mean that your wine is going to be sold in any other state. And they all think they're going to get with a national importer when they're tiny and they don't meet the requirements that are required by a national importer. So, on the one hand, there are so many producers who want to find outlets, and there aren't that many importers for them, or they haven't done enough work in understanding the intricacies of the American market. And then one of the biggest barriers is that they all think they all have the same story. My grandfather made wine, or I have a terroir, or it's a very vague concept that doesn't distinguish them from anybody else. They haven't really thought hard enough about their unique selling point. And in the end, then they just become another winery that's just another winery with nothing to recommend it. And then I think the last thing I'll say is that, all states are, and all importers not being equal. And a lot of producers think all they need to do is find an importer, and they find one importer and then they don't do anything, and they don't understand the degree to which importers, they import and they sell, but they really are looking for partners. And the producer's job doesn't stop with just producing the wine. Rather, importers are really looking for partners who are going to come to the market, develop relationships, and actually help the importer and the ultimate distributor selling the wine.
Yeah, it's so complicated, the U.S. market, the 3-tier system, and all the things you just highlighted. I think some of these, as you said, smaller wineries in Central and Eastern Europe, yeah, they need you to point out where the pitfalls are and how to get across those pitfalls.
Yeah, well, and you even have large wineries that make everyday wines that are from various places, and they make perfectly acceptable $9, $7, $8 liter bottles of wine. That they're wine. That's about all you can say to them, and they don't understand that we already have a lot of that. and they have to come up with various concepts to try to present that, even to present that to an importer and find somebody who'd be willing to take it.
And this is why wine is so fascinating. It's the storytelling, and you only get one chance to make a first impression. So
that's right.
If you get it wrong the first time, there's probably not going to be a second time. So
correct.
Yeah, so Tastingworks has definitely got its handful, I'm sure, at the moment, especially with the tariff issues and other things like that. But I won't
absolutely.
I won't go into that at the moment either. We're going to avoid all these things, influencers, politics. We'll avoid all. You've also published sort of the book on Georgian wines, and you are, universally seen as the expert on the region. What drew you to Georgia? What's your perception of the wines developing there at the moment? With Georgia being such a key player in the orange wine field and having, the most ancient history of winemaking, what do you see going on there? Is orange wine going to continue moving forward? Is quality going to emerge? What's happening on the Georgia wine scene?
There are a lot of questions here. I first went to Georgia, as you said, when I was a lawyer, and I had met Georgian lawyers and a number of Georgians when I was a lawyer. And so I ended up there during a Fulbright back in the 90s. And number one, it's simply a captivating place. And I, ended up going to Russia and deciding to come back to Georgia at the end of that year because it was such a compelling place to be, even though at the time the wine there was undrinkable and because it was Soviet plum. But once I entered the wine trade, I ended up going back on a USAID program that brought so-called experts. And by that time I was an MW to look at the Georgian wine industry and to make recommendations on how it could basically kind of a Tastingworks job to go and say how can we as a country improve our wine and improve our exports. And on that trip then because I had this history with Georgia, the Georgian government approached me and said, we want to work with you. And so I worked with the Georgians officially for a number of years. And as I did, the wines were certainly not world-class levels, but I began to see that the grape varieties were distinctive, the terroirs were distinctive. And if you look around the world, as a student of wine, every serious wine region has a book. And I concluded that I was uniquely situated to write that book. The place wasn't ready to do it at the time, but that was starting in about 2014 or 15. And so I spent about 6 years doing research. And in that time, things changed dramatically. I've joked and I've written in the book that Georgians were working and the country's changing at warp speed. They have a history of constantly being invaded, and then they constantly rebuild. And in the 21st century, these things, like everything, technology things happen at much greater speed. And you see that happening even in a subject like wine, where you only have one shot a year to make wine. And if it's not successful, you have to wait another year. But, so what drew me there in terms of helping them with the wine scene was that it's a place where I have, fierce, very strong emotional attachment. And I felt, again, that it was something bigger than myself. It doesn't matter whether I like the wines or not. These wines these varieties in the wine style have a history and they have a place at the table. And it's a very poor country. And I felt as though it was something that I could do to improve the lot of Georgia and Georgian wine. It's not a country like Italy and France that has various industries and they do rice and pasta and cheese, etc. Georgia has a tiny cheese industry, but wine has a disproportionate percentage of their exports among wine exporting countries. So the wines, when I went there, I told you in the Soviet period, it was plonk because it was taken over by mass production. As they started to redevelop the wine industry in the 2000s, they really tried to follow a European mindset, which is that we need to compete with Italian Pinot Grigio and very easy to drink European wines to be popular. But these wines were, I'll just say, I don't want to say they were fine, but they had as much character as a lot of ordinary Italian Pinot Grigio, and that's not going to cut it in the world market. They need to have their own USP, and their grape varieties have to speak for what they are and the terroir which they come from. And my activities in the past number of years have been encouraging for producers to do that, to really look at to understand their varieties and how they perform best in certain areas. Orange wine, ultimately what happened was, after developing all this Pinot Grigio, there were a number of family producers who said, we make all this wine, but none of it's interesting. And my grandfather's wine was always much more fun. And then the government ended up getting behind the movement of family wineries. And so what really took hold in the international market were these small families who they were not professional winemakers. I mean, they basically were taking the wine that they had been sharing amongst all of their relatives and putting a label on it and selling it. And so it's home wine with all of the flaws and problems that home wines around the world always have. But because of just competition and increased in exchange with Georgia and the world, there are some producers who are not content just to sell their 5,000 bottles and do it all over again in the same style. Some of them are trying to become much more professional. They've now had guests from around the world. They've traveled and they see what the world standards of wine are, and they are trying to improve their quality. They're using sulfur, for example. They're not just going down the natural wine route. I mean, when I was in Georgia in December, I was visiting one of my favorite producers, Rosasvili in Kakheti, and he, by his own admission, I'm glad I didn't say his name all that clearly, because he says basically, I'm a peasant guy, makes no bones, he's not pretentious at all, he's a sweet, wonderful guy, but a very focused winemaker, and he had just come back from Bordeaux, and he said, my eyes have been so opened. My life has changed. We have 8,000 years of history, but we're 500 years behind. I have to rethink everything.
Bordeaux does this to people.
I have to rethink everything I'm doing. And so there's no question that we are on an upswing in high quality home wines in Georgia. By the same token, the larger producers are also understanding that they need to find a way to have their wines have more character. And so you see some sort of, there's still divergence, but there's some convergence there. Insofar as orange wine, or, the Georgians want to say it's amber wine. Okay. Amber, because remember, first of all, people do think it's made from oranges. It's not.
I know, exactly.
Secondly, it's not always orange in color. And then people say, is this really an orange wine when it's not orange? And amber covers a broader spectrum of colors than orange. And finally, amber is a semi-precious stone. So embrace your inner jewel. In any event, it is a category. It's not necessarily a category that's going to be for everyone. I mean, look, there are a lot of people who don't like white wines or don't want to drink rosé for whatever reason. I'm for one who always wants a great degree of heterogeneity in wine. And now that said, having an orange wine is a different taste experience because people are not used to having tannins in a white wine. And in fact, when you have a white wine with tannin, without the coloring matter that makes a red wine red, those tannins actually bind with the coloring matter in a red wine and soften the tannins by the time it hits your saliva. Okay. Without the coloring matter, the tannins are more aggressive. And so some people are, if they don't like really tannic wines, they're going to have a hard time with these. That said, producers are trying to produce more fine grained, more elegant orange wines that will appeal to a wider sector of the population.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I've had people say, in tastings of wines like this is a red wine in a white dress.
Yes,
absolutely that, and it's a difficult concept for people to get their heads around. So it's good to know that there's quality emerging and keeping that history going. It's 8,000 years of winemaking. I'd like to see some good quality coming out too now. So
there are plenty of good producers all around the country, and there's no question that quality gets better and better every time I go. Yes, are there still new people trying to figure things out, and they show their wines to me and they have one flaw after another, but they're very receptive when I say, this is what I see. I can't tell you where it comes from. I can, depending on what we have a conversation, sometimes there are too many factors to go to say what the real answer is. But sometimes they'll say, yeah, you said this and you're right. Okay, next time I'll try to change it.
Which is great. I mean, that's all you can do. Be supportive. Don't shut the door against those flawed home wines, and hope to God that you find the inner jewel in one of those small producers who wants to really do things right. So
that's right. And I think, and what some of these small producers or some medium-sized producers, I mean, what's really exciting is that they're now planting a greater diversity of grape varieties and exploring terroirs that, had been largely ignored in the past, whether 50 odd years. And so there's much more interesting wines to come, and they're applying what they've learned moving forward. So I think we're really at the beginning rather than, sort of a down, or even a plateau.
That's so positive. I mean, just for our listeners who don't know, how many grape varietals indigenous are there in Georgia?
Well, minimally, there are 535. There's a book out recently. The Georgians claim that there are over 600. They haven't done DNA testing on all of them, so it's hard to say how some might be related or some might be similar with different names, as happens in Portugal, for example. There are lots of grapes that have multiple names, but we know that there are at least there are well over 500. Now, some of those I'll say are simply table grapes, but Georgia, the whole area around Georgia, Armenia, Eastern Turkey, that area of the Transcaucasus is where Vitis vinifera seems to have started. And there was, intergenerational planting and pollination over the course of time. Actually, just as a curiosity, Georgia has a remarkable number of female grape varieties. I mean, most cultivated grape varieties are hermaphroditic, and they self-pollinate. The bees go around and you can plant them all amongst together. But Georgia has a number of grape varieties that are female, which means that you have two rows of a female variety and then 2 rows of another hermaphroditic variety. So when the bees go around, they actually pollinate the female varieties.
Are you enjoying this podcast? There is so much more high-quality wine content available from Mama Jumbo Shrimp. Check out our new wine study maps or books on Italian wine, including Italian Wine Unplugged and much, much more. Just visit our website, mamajumboshrimp.com. Now, back to the show.
I think the next time we've got Professor Attilio Cienza in the house, I'm going to have a chat with him about Georgian wines.
He's worked on it.
Yeah, no, I know he has. Well, what has he not worked on? The man's incredible. But listen, of all the many things you do, in a year, one of the most fascinating things for me is your role at the Institute of Masters of Wine. You're, as I said, on the governance committee and the diversity, inclusion, and transformation committee. Why are these committees so crucial at the moment? What are you hoping to achieve with your work there? I mean, we know that our industry is behind in addressing issues of diversity. How is the Institute of Master of Wine looking at this?
Well, I mean, this really has more to do with the diversity committee than the governance committee. But as we know, part of the issue has been, and the MW, I have to say, is at the pinnacle. And so we are people who have been in the wine industry for a long time, and it's been a white industry. There's just no two ways about it.
Absolutely.
And so you can't just take somebody from somewhere else in the world and say, go into the MW program and become an MW in 5 years when they haven't had the adequate training. So we're trying to find ways, number one, we organize webinars and try to, and one of the things we've always done is we don't pay people. And so you kind of, like everything else, you look around and you ask your friends to work with you. And most of us have friends who are at the upper echelons, and that's a white audience. And even if there's geographic diversity, even if there's gender diversity, even if you have some people from India or, Southeast Asia, it's still a pretty monolithic panel. And so the aim is we've developed a database, and we're trying to do things to ensure that a greater number of so that we are aware of people outside of our own networks that can contribute to these conversations. Then in terms of our own operations, we are primarily an educational program. And in any school, people hang out with people like themselves. And we've installed a number of different trainings. First, we started with an online training for anybody in the education program so that they're aware of their internal biases. And we're going to require henceforth that anybody who is involved in the educational program must take this course in order to participate in the educational program. And then if they don't abide by it, then their expenses are not going to be reimbursed, or if something goes awry, they're on their own and they can't rely on the IMW for any kind of support. They're totally cut loose to defend it. But we really wanted to start with, getting our own house in order. And another thing is, as I said, like in lots of schools, people get together and, well, because we don't have classes, we have seminars where people get together from all around the world. And the number of people of color are definitely in a minority. And we want to make certain that we are welcoming to them. And we're trying to figure out, change things in our own heads and our own actions to have a truly, not just say, oh yeah, we want more people to apply, but yes, when you apply, we will be supportive of you. We will approach you. We will include you. And as well as being supportive, I'm trying to mentor a number of other people who aren't yet at MW level, but certainly encouraging them to follow the right path should they choose to become an MW. So those are and then the other thing I have to say is that, the IMW is originally an English organization. And as I would argue, like the alcohol trade worldwide, it is largely a male-driven organization. There's no two ways about it. And that's a continuing struggle. And I'm trying to keep them to account to ensure that gender bias is a thing of the past.
It's so good to know that we've got you on the committee fighting that corner. It's interesting. It's very important. I mean, we've seen it go through, the Hollywood and show business. We're seeing it go through sports, and it's good to know that our own industry is going through, what is a painful recognition of our faults and our failings. And I'm very glad to know that you've got a voice in that, and that you've got that corner going. So
thanks a lot. It's difficult. I shouldn't say it's difficult, because it's a lot more difficult for a lot of people other than me. It was kind of an arrogant statement, but there are a lot of people who are ignorant of their own ignorance. And it's often an incredible challenge to say to people, okay, you don't, just because you don't see bias, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
It's very true. Very true. These conversations are incredibly difficult. They're uncomfortable, but the more that we have them, and the more that we have them with people who have privilege and don't recognize that privilege, I think the better things are bound to get, or I hope so anyway. So
yeah, I hope so too. I mean, it tends to be transformative, and I know that it certainly makes me think twice. I'm guilty of lots of malaprops, and I put my foot in my mouth, and then I realize that I've made, all of a sudden I say, oh my God, I opened my mouth before my brain engaged, and I have to think about things, and it's a journey, and I think, but I do think it's where we need to go as an industry. Even if in many areas of the world, there's no question that we're fighting against some serious waves right now.
Well, you've opened the door beautifully for my next question, because Somm Journal named you a leading woman in wine a couple of years ago. In your opinion, across our industry, what work needs to be done? What advice would you give to young women wanting to enter the wine sector right now?
I think, it's great. I've been inspired by women younger than me who are unwilling to be cowed, and have shown tremendous courage in speaking out, getting together and speaking out. I mean, there were, I remember myself. I mean, I could give plenty of instances, but I had some pretty ugly things happen to me, and I shut up because I knew I would lose my job, I would not get another job, et cetera, et cetera. And there are ways now. There are people you can speak with, and there are ways to make your voice heard. And I think that women have to make themselves heard. It's for every woman to figure out how to do it. But, the other thing too is that, it's not even, I'm just a little white lady, but there are ways in which certainly Black Americans, particularly, and these are the ones that I see, are out there saying, hey, this is who I am. And I represent a demographic. I represent a buying demographic to whom you can't speak. You need to let me be me, and I can sell more product. And this opens, like, as I said, I don't want there to be one kind of wine. There needs to be more kinds of wine. There are plenty of grapes grown in the world. I want more people to drink different kinds of wine. I don't have to drink what you drink. You don't have to drink what I love. It's tastes in many ways are very subjective, and I know that I can't speak to everyone. And I think that diversity of opinion, diversity of personality is only healthy. Long-term sustainability, long-term health for the wine industry.
Yeah, I so agree. And I think as you said, heterogeneity of wine is crucial, especially when we're talking about, bringing different cultures together, pairing wines with, foods that haven't been traditionally paired with wine, Asian food, Indian food, Caribbean spicy food, things like that. It's such a big part of what could make the wine world so much more inclusive, that the more wines we have, the more likely it is for some newbie to find something they love and fall into the industry really happily. So I completely agree with that.
But a lot of people get into it. Some people fall into it, but then they think, oh, it's for educated people, or oh, it's for, it's elitist. It's this, that, the other thing. But some people, wine needs wine communicators, and then people do look for people who look like them. And look, there are plenty of wineries that don't have an outlet to sell their wines, and this having more different kinds of people selling different kinds of wines means that producers, both consumers and producers, win, because there are more wines to be sold and people reaching out to other kinds of people that don't necessarily look like you or me.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I mean, it's not only communication in terms of marketing, but it's also communication in terms of educating. And I know that you're a teacher at heart. I am a teacher at heart as well. And you keep your hand in with educating, in the wine world at the International Wine Center in New York, where Vinitaly International is holding our VIA course in March. What do you want to give your students as a takeaway from your classes? When I teach young, sort of 19, 20, 21-year-old students on their semesters abroad, beyond wine knowledge, what do you want them to take away? How do you see the future of wine education, especially sort of given the fact that we've become really aware that wine language is very exclusive of people and cultures who aren't white, as you said, or Eurocentric or well-educated or Anglo-Saxon? How are you dealing with this in your educational life?
I always want people to walk away with a sense of wonder of wine. That, whether it's quote unquote natural, no wine is natural, it's vinegar. But somehow we take these grapes in a glass and they go through all sorts of processes and they turn into something that is influenced by, it's Mother Nature, it's human intervention, and biochemistry. All of these things come together, and it's a wonder that they turn into something that they can turn into something so completely different from what that grape tasted like, or similar to what that grape was, and how wine goes from grape to glass is amazing. And I find that some people get bogged down in the weeds of, oh, did you use sulfur? And oh, did you do that? And while on the one hand, I do think it's very important to develop a very clear framework, an analytical framework to understand what makes a good wine, because there are certain things that are objective, are objective in thinking. And so it's very important to walk away from a wine education to say, this, I can assert that I can tell you why this is a very good wine. I don't like it. That's a different matter. It's a very good wine. It's not my style. Conversely, this wine is okay. It might be flawed. It might not be very complex. It might be whatever it is, but I love it. And to be able to distinguish between an analytical take on a quality assessment of a wine and your own personal preference, that is crucial. And that really is the flip side of, yes, you should think wine is amazing and never lose sight of how wonderful it can be and how the world is always changing. But you need to be able, but if you're going to be a wine educator, and if you're going to be serious about wine, then you need to be able to distinguish between correct analysis of a wine and an analysis of its objective parts, as well as and distinguishing that from your subjective point of view.
Absolutely. And there's nothing to say that personal preference is bad or wrong, but knowing the difference between actual quality and your own personal likes and dislikes is crucial. And that's a great thing to give students. It's such a good tool for especially young people or people new to wine at any age. It gives them confidence to understand. Yeah, so that's really great. I think that's a great gift. Now, before I let you go, I have got to ask you my famous final question. If you're going to open a bottle of Italian wine on sort of the average Wednesday, just for yourself, just, no judging, no writing notes, no having to write up an article, what Italian wine would you choose?
I'm someone who, I'm not going to say never drink the same thing twice, and I'm very struck by the moment, but this one, my knee-jerk response is always going to be Chianti Classico. And my partly because I've always loved Chianti and I've seen how Chianti has evolved. And I always think the wines are so delicious. And I think, unfortunately, people have to think that Barolo is better. I think Sangiovese is wonderfully, wonderfully expressive. And actually being in Chianti Classico was the moment when I actually decided that I knew that my decision to leave Russian area studies and the law behind, and that wine was my way forward.
That's fantastic. I love that story. And I don't think anybody can diss you for choosing Chianti Classico and Sangiovese, certainly not in my office. So thank you so much, Lisa. It's been a total pleasure talking to you today. I'm really grateful for your time.
Thank you again so much.
I hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks a lot, you too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly Academy, home of the gold standard of Italian wine education. Do you want to be the next ambassador? Apply online at vinitalyinternational.com for courses in London, Austria, and Hong Kong, the 27th to the 29th of July. Remember to subscribe and like Italian Wine Podcast, and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find our entire back catalog of episodes at ItalianWinePodcast.com.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.